Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and we are in day 3 of the Learning 2.0 conference. Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Thanks to our Learning 2.0 sponsors and supporters. We appreciate Follett and Intel for providing some financial support, and Mighty Bell Blackboard Collaborate, Taking It Global EdWeb, and Edutopia for helping to publicize the conference. And Julie, I turn the time over to you.
Thanks so much, Steve. As I said, I am thrilled to be here today. I am so excited about this conference. I had the opportunity to sit in on a couple sessions yesterday, and we'll be doing the same here through the rest of the afternoon. What we're going to be doing today is talking about the Speak Up 2011 national results. We're calling it Connecting the Dots with Digital Learning this year. And so what we're going to do is share some of those results. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Speak Up as we get started. But once again, as Steve introduced, my name is Julie Evans, and I'm the CEO of Project Tomorrow. So the big questions that we're going to be discussing today are: what are the expectations of K-12 students for personalizing learning? How well are our schools meeting those expectations of the students? And actually, how well are they meeting the expectations of parents? We're also going to talk around some of the realities around what's happening in EdTech, K-12 EdTech, from the perspective of the students, the parents, the teachers, and the administrators. And then before we end up today, I'm also going to share with you some of the key trends and issues that we're following. I'm sure many of these are the same type of things that you're following. I've seen a lot of them on the agenda here for Learning 2.0. So we'll have a little bit of a discussion about those. I have definitely left some time today for us to have some discussion, some Q&A, and so I'm looking forward to that. So as I said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Speak Up National Research Project, just in case you're not familiar with it, and then share with you what we've learned about the student vision for personalized learning. And then what we've done with the data this year is that we've taken a look at it across the landscape of K-12 EdTech. And so I'm going to talk to you specifically about enabling technologies, what we're learning from the data in terms of what are those enabling technologies, what are some intermediate outcomes that are being driven by those enabling technologies, and then what I'm calling sticky wickets that are out there. So some of the things that's still to be decided, still to be talked about, still to be debated. We're going to talk about a couple of those. So in case you're not familiar with the Speak Up National Research Project, let me tell you a little bit about it. It is conducted through online surveys and focus groups. It's an unusual research project for a couple different reasons. First and foremost, because it's open to every K-12 school or district that would like to participate. We don't go out and select this school, this district to participate. We actually make it available, the online surveys, to every K-12 school or district. The other thing that makes it a little bit unique is that every bit of data that we have is tied to a school or district identifier. So we don't have a random teacher that takes the online survey or a random student. We actually have schools and districts register to participate with us, and that is fundamentally because we give back to all the participating schools and districts their own locally collected data with the national data to use for their own benchmarking. We take the national data and we share that with Congress every year. I'll talk about that in a moment, as well as think tanks, research organizations have the opportunity to participate here in Learning 2.0. We started this project in 2003, so as you can see, since that time we've had quite a few online surveys that have been submitted to us. Types of questions on the online surveys, which by the way take about 15 to 20 minutes, are as you would expect. Now we have different audiences for the online surveys. We have surveys for kindergarten through 12th grade students, grade level appropriate, reading level appropriate, of course. We also have a survey for teachers, for school site administrators, for librarians, district administrators, as well as parents. And actually this upcoming Speak Up year, we're also going to have a survey for technology coordinators. So as I said, the questions are as you would expect about learning and teaching with technology, though we do ask different questions of different audiences. We asked parents about internet safety. We asked teachers about their professional development needs. We asked all the respondents, though, to talk to us about their use and aspirational use of emerging technologies, mobile learning, online learning, social media, digital content, e-textbooks. And we also asked the respondents what types of technology do they think would have the greatest impact on learning. That's sort of our take on designing the 21st century school or the school of the future. So the data that I brought with me today to share with you is from Speak Up 2011. The surveys were open for about 10 weeks, from the middle of October to about the middle of December. Last fall, as I said, schools and districts decide how they want to participate during that time frame. But we had about 416,000 online surveys that were submitted to us. You can see the breakdown there. That represents about 5,600 schools and about 1,200 districts nationwide. We did have participation from all 50 states, though we did have some really strong participation from a couple of states that are worth noting: Texas, California, Florida, Indiana, and North Carolina. We presented the reports last year to Congress, 2 national reports that we created, and we do those congressional briefings every year. The reason I bring these up is that they are fully downloadable from our website, tomorrow.org. Part of our nonprofit mission, and Project Tomorrow is a nonprofit, is to not only collect this data, but also to make it available to impact local, state, and federal policies and programs. So at the end, I'll give you some more information on how you can get some of that. Some of the other reports that we released this spring I also thought might be of interest. We did one, a 5-year retrospective on the growth of online learning, and then also a special white paper on social learning tools. And we have a number of papers that are going to be coming out later on in the fall. Okay, so all of this data that Speak Up has, what does it tell us about the future of learning? Well, here's our take on it. A couple different things jump out at us when we look at it, especially over time from 2003 on. In many ways, today's students are functioning as a digital advance team for the rest of us. We need to think about them more as the pace car or the tech trendsetters. And in fact, from our data analysis, when we look at how students are using technology outside of school, in their personal lives, it's actually a wonderful predictor of how they would like to use technology within their more formalized education processes. We also know that where many of us talk about adopting new technologies, for today's students, it's all about how they're adapting them. In many cases, they are taking products, services, tools, bending, twisting, moving them all around to be able to fit what they see as deficiencies in their learning lives. We also have been obviously talking to students for quite a while, both through the survey and also through our focus groups. And what we have heard every year is that students' frustration, their pain point, their disappointment level, shall we say, is not on the lack of technology in our schools, but rather on the unsophisticated use of that technology. And that by itself actually is exasperating this digital disconnect between adults and students. Now we also know, and this was the focus of our reports this year, that the students are leveraging a wide range of different technologies to personalize their learning process outside of school. They're personalizing their lives, but also their learning process, as many of us are. And they desperately want to bring that same level of personalization into their school life. Now that brought us to a couple years ago to start talking about the student vision for personalized learning, a fabulous complement to the National Education Technology Plan or to many state plans, many district plans, but it's unique for these 3 components. The students are very interested in social-based learning environments. Now by social-based, they don't mean just communications. They truly mean collaboration. They really want to develop their own personal learning networks amongst their peers, amongst their teachers, with professionals in different careers, because they really believe that that brings the world resources into their learning world. They also are very interested in untethered learning. They do not want to be bound by the limitations of the physicality of their school or their community. And then this idea of digitally rich learning. strong digital content, the opportunity to use digital content and digital tools. Quite often we talk about that in terms of student engagement. The students talk about it in terms of bringing relevancy and context to their learning process, and that's why it's important for them. Okay, let me set a little bit more context with you, and we're going to look at some of the administrator data that we've collected, which I thought might be interesting to sort of set up our conversation. For the last couple of years, we've been asking administrators, what wakes you up in the middle of the night? It's a general question, not specific to technology. And so no surprise here that we see that the administrators will say funding is the #1 issue. What's been more interesting to us over the last couple of years is to see where adequate technology and the use of technology in learning is moving up in the rankings. Now, that's not to say that the other things aren't important, but it's been interesting to see that particular movement of those two items. Also, when we asked administrators, so what has the greatest potential to enhance student achievement, we also have seen an increase in their emphasis on technology to address that need. Of course, enhancing teacher effectiveness is important, but technology is increasingly playing a role in that conversation. The other thing that we think is interesting here is a little bit of a disconnect on that, though, between school site administrators and district level administrators, with the district office much more interested in the potential of technology in that way. Now, talking about the importance of technology within instruction, this is a question we've actually been asking over the last couple of years, and actually, to be honest with you, we have not seen much movement in the data. But let me decipher this a little bit for you. So we asked the teachers, the administrators, and the parents, how important is the effective use of technology within instruction? Now, all three of the groups summed up together say it's important. However, look at the blue line here. The blue line is from those respondents who said it was extremely important. So we see that parents and administrators are ranking that use of technology at a higher degree, much more important than the teachers are. And in fact, the other thing that is sometimes quite interesting for districts, and remember, the schools and districts that participate in Speak Up not only get this national data, but they get their own localized data so they can see where their own teachers are, where their own parents are, and administrators, is that quite often the administrators are concerned about the teachers that are still ranking technology as only somewhat important. Now, a new question that we asked last year is that we asked administrators to take sort of a retrospective look at their EdTech budgets. So how did your budget compare today, last fall, to the 2008-2009 school year? We were trying to place sort of the pre-recessionary time frame. So no big surprise here. About 50% said their budgets are less. About a quarter said it was the same. About a quarter said it was more. Now we asked them, so what is the impact of that? So we can see here for a large percentage of those administrators, they have either cut back on education technology projects or put them on hold. Many are going after federal funds to be able to support some of those efforts, tapping into their Title I funds. And some are also, a little bit more than a quarter, are starting to think about technology as a way to decrease cost or increase revenue. Now we thought that was really interesting. So we had a subsequent question where we asked the administrators, so what tech solutions are you thinking about to help you with your budget situation? We know about the instructional side, but how about on the budget side? And so this is where we see that administrators are looking at e-textbooks, digital textbooks, maybe the idea of providing their students with tablets where once upon a time maybe they were thinking about laptops, online teacher professional development, and you can see some of the other things that they're thinking about. Now we also polled parents about their concerns about their child's future. Now this is very interesting because you may have noted on the earlier slide, our parent survey is actually available in English as well as Spanish. So I pulled for you here today the California specific data. We always disaggregate the data by states and we look at it all sorts of different ways because we had a large percentage of our parent surveys in California did come in on the Spanish survey. So we asked parents, what are your top concerns about your child's future? Learning the right skills to be successful is the #1 for both audiences. And so we thought that was very interesting. The other thing that we thought was very telling is that when we looked at the differences between these two surveys, obviously our parents that are taking the Spanish-speaking survey are much more concerned about just getting their child graduated from high school than the parents on the English survey. And then to the student point of view here, to set some context, we asked the students, how do you define success with your schoolwork? And we thought this was particularly interesting for the conversation that we're all having around personalizing learning. We know that students are motivated by good grades and getting into college. What we thought was interesting is that the students were telling us, and I have done this also in focus groups with students, that they actually have their own personal learning goals, and that in many cases their teachers, their parents, school administrators are not even aware of the fact that they have their own personal learning goals that are motivating them, that are driving them. It's the way they define success. So we thought that was interesting. Okay, so let's get into some of these enabling technologies, and I just picked a few here for you. I should probably tell you up front, if you're not familiar with some of the Speak Up reports or some of our work, I'm probably going to have the opportunity here today to share with you maybe 10 to 15% of the data findings that we have. So please feel free to go and visit our website and if you're looking for some additional data, and we can even get into that in our discussion time as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little bit around online learning, a little bit around social media, a little bit around some gaming data that we have, and then also talk about mobile learning, which we know is important. So in terms of online learning as an enabler of personalized learning, we thought this was really interesting. We took a look at students' interest in taking an online class. We went back and looked at our data from 2007 and compared it to 2011. So the thing that was interesting here, and let's just look at the middle school students here for a moment, is that when we looked at the middle school students in 2007, 24% of them were interested in taking an online class, and as you can see, over a majority said, no, it's not for me, it's not my thing. And in 2011, it has shifted. And actually, this was the first year that we had more students that were interested in taking an online class than those that said it was not for them. We asked the students, why are you interested in taking an online class? Now, for the high school students, it's all about scheduling and college credit. Convenience. Take that class not offered. For middle school students, it's actually about changing their learning paradigm, and we absolutely think this is fascinating. So the middle school students talked to us about their interest in taking an online class so that they would be in control of the learning process. They like the idea of working at their own pace. They also feel that they could have better collaborations with their classmates. They'd be more comfortable asking questions of the teacher in this environment. Now this brings up another really interesting point. You know, all of us in this particular sector have talked about for the last couple of years, it's a little bit of a dated term now, that the whole concept of digital natives, digital immigrants. As I said, it's a little dated at this point. One of the things that we think is really interesting is that when we look at our Speak Up data, what it points us to is that really the leading edge of the truly digital natives are those students that are going to be entering 8th grade this year. And in fact, we see in many aspects of our data major differences in attitudes around the use of technology and aspirations for using technology between high school students and middle school students, and then again, middle school students to elementary students. This idea of digital nativeness has nuances. It actually has little mini generations built into it. And so that idea of painting with one broad brush and saying all these students want to do this or all these students want to do that actually doesn't hold any water with the Speak Up data. We asked this question actually in 2008 and came back and asked it again. I thought it was interesting to share with you. And it's the question about, should students be required to take an online class for graduation? And look here also in that shift in terms of the acceptance around this idea, particularly amongst administrators. Over 2/3 of administrators now think it's a good idea for students to have that sort of learning opportunity. Now, educators themselves are having more and more opportunities with online learning for their own professional development. And this is also the first year that we reached over sort of that tipping point of 50% in terms of teachers, principals, and district administrators saying they've taken some type of an online class. In fact, teachers now tell us, at least a third of them tell us, that the online course is their #1 choice for professional development. And if they've taken an online course, that number even goes up a little bit higher. Now for the educators, it's around a lot of the same things that we're hearing from the students. They like the idea of the scheduling and convenience, but they also like the idea of customizing that learning process to their own particular needs. Now, very specifically to digital content, we asked teachers about their wish list for professional development on the integration of digital content into their classroom, into their instruction. And we thought it was particularly interesting that while they still are interested in face-to-face professional development, working through a PLC at their school, they also are very interested in the very tangible aspects of, give me an online collection of vetted resources, grade level, content-specific resources that I can tap into, to play with, to work with, and that would be an important part of their professional development. All right, let's talk a little bit about social media. And this was a really interesting question. We asked students, middle school and high school students, about math this year. A couple different questions around math instruction. I have some of that data for you in a moment as well. But we asked them specifically, how would you design the ultimate math class? What would it look like? And we gave them several different scenarios and options to choose from. And very interestingly, the idea of collaborating with classmates on problem solving came up as #1. So for a long time in math instruction, we've talked about the importance of bringing real-world problems into the instructional base. And in fact, what we're finding is that the students are interested in those real-world problems, but the secret sauce is really the collaboration with classmates, going right back to what I was saying before about the social media and the social-based learning. The other thing that we thought was interesting is the students are interested in using a range of different types of technologies, but again, adapting them to particular circumstances. So they want to be able to have that mobile device with them in class, particularly because they want to be able to text their teacher during math class to ask her a question, or him, and to be able to get an immediate response. As you might imagine, when I present this data in front of lots of teacher groups, they have a little bit of a problem with that concept. We also have been really interested to see how teachers and administrators are using more social media for their own collaborations. And you can see there the breakdown in terms of teachers, principals, and district administrators participating in professional learning communities, updating a social networking site, using Twitter, some really interesting uses. What was particularly interesting to us was the growth on the teacher side just since 2007. Look at that. Less than a quarter of teachers were doing these things in 2007, so huge growth in terms of the adoption of social media as a professional development tool and also within their own tasks. We also asked teachers about using technology within their professional learning community or a professional development community, and you can see the type of things they're interested in. Very interested, again, in this collaboration, as the students are, not just with teachers at their own school, but also with teachers at other schools. In fact, those two numbers, I don't have the percentages up here, but they were almost exactly the same. #1 and #2 both came in at about 42% of the teachers were interested in that. Let's talk just a little bit about games. We asked the teachers about how they would use digital or online games with their students, sort of in what type of modality would you be using those games. And so with the Speak Up data, as some of you are familiar, we're all kind of data geeks over here, and we love to slice and dice the data and look at it so many different ways. So one of the ways we do it is based on the assignment. So we look at elementary teachers versus middle school teachers versus high school teachers. But then we also look on the middle school and high school teacher side in terms of their discipline area. And so because we had an emphasis this year on math, we pulled out math teachers individually. And we thought it was particularly interesting that in several areas, the math teachers were right in line with their peers, and you don't see much differentiation there. But in then some other areas, you definitely see some differentiation. So we thought it was particularly interesting that the elementary teachers were more tied into games allowing them to address different learning styles in the classroom than the middle school, high school teachers, or than the math teachers. Okay, let's talk about mobile learning. This is always an interesting topic for folks. This is a question that we ask every year on the survey. It's actually a favorite slide of many people's. We asked students about their personal access to mobile devices. This is not devices that are provided by their school. This is their own personal, family-provided personal access to devices. So a couple different things I'm going to tell you here about what we found in 2011. In 2011, we continued to see a softening in terms of students carrying, shall we call them, feature cell phones without internet access, and that was offset by the increase in students that had smartphones. The real story, though, this year was about tablets. In 2010, fall 2010, about 13% of middle school students told us they had a tablet. Last fall, it was 26%, as you can see here. I probably need to edit this slide and put a asterisk on it because our surveys closed on December 23rd. So as you can imagine, in our data here, we don't have holiday gifts from last year. So I really can't wait until we actually see the data from this fall from Speak Up 2012 to see where we are in that number. We asked students about how you'd like to use a mobile device to help you with schoolwork. Basically, it comes into one of two flavors. Students say they want to increase the way they do school. They want to check grades. They want to take notes, maybe access a textbook online, use the school calendar. So I think the thing that's more interesting is where the students talk about wanting to leverage the features and functionality of these devices to personalize learning, to be able to do that anytime, anywhere research, to receive reminders and alerts. Many of us receive reminders and alerts on our mobile devices. The kids want to do the same thing, to be able to use it for collaboration, and also to be able to access that school network from home. If school is going to be the repository of content and projects, they need to be able to access that from anywhere, any place. Now, for the last couple of years, we've also been asking, actually since the very beginning of Speak Up, we've been asking students about their home internet access. And this actually came, this particular impetus, shall we say, for this question, particular nuance of this question, came from our own focus groups and our evaluation work that we've been doing across the country on mobile learning. So this year we asked a slightly different question. We asked the students about their home internet access, but then we also asked them if their primary access to the internet when they were out of school was through a 3G or 4G mobile device. So it was fascinating to see that over 50% of the high school students told us, in fact, that was the way they were accessing the internet, was through a 3G or 4G mobile device. And then when we disaggregated this and looked at it, students in urban areas, suburban areas, and rural areas, as you can see, very little differentiation on that data at all. Now, continuing this theme of mobile learning as an enabler, we asked parents if your child's school allowed for the use of mobile devices and they would be used for educational purposes, how likely is it that you would purchase a mobile device for your child to use at school? And as you can see, 62% of the parents told us that that was likely. That number was just about the same as what we got in 2010. I should also tell you that when we disaggregate that number and we look at parents in urban communities, suburban communities, and rural communities, and Title I communities, we see very little differentiation in that number. The only true differentiation that we see in this number is when we disaggregate it by parents of elementary students, middle school students, and high school students. The high school number goes up to about 70%. The elementary number only drops to a little bit under 60%. I should also tell you that we also asked parents about their willingness to pay for a data plan, and a majority of parents say they're willing to do that as well. So this, as you can imagine, I think some of the comments have been on the side as well, is really very interesting for supporting the bring your own device, bring your own technology, and it's been very enlightening for administrators. Okay, so those were some of the enabling technologies that we're taking a look at. Now I want to share with you what we're getting out of the data in terms of some outcomes of some of that enabling technology usage. So the first one is what we called this year in our national report DIY learning, or DIY learning from the standpoint of students driving their own learning at home. So this is the idea of students leveraging their own educational destiny, shall we say, by tapping into technology to help them explore some of their educational passions that they have at home. So we saw students were starting to send out some tweets. Some have found some online classes to take on their own. Some really interesting work around using some mobile apps to stay organized. As you can see, 1 out of 4 students last fall told us that they have used a video that they found online to help them. Obviously, the Khan Academy impact there. And then the other one that we think is really interesting is the idea of students, again back to that adaptation, where the students are adapting the different technologies. Students are using Facebook as an impromptu collaboration tool for classroom projects, even middle school students. Now, the other thing we took a look at in terms of these outcomes was a really strong statement coming out of the data that when educators have a personal value proposition associated with any one of the different technologies, they're more likely to be supportive of using that within instruction. So mobile learning is one that comes to mind, and it was very interesting to take a look at how the access that educators have to these mobile devices actually compares to Americans in general. So we pulled from our good friends over at Pew their results from just this past March and did a comparison. So as you can see there, in terms of smartphones, the number is 70% of administrators say that they have a smartphone. In general, Americans, as of March, 46% said they had a smartphone. And actually, the educators are outpacing Americans in general in terms of having tablets. So really setting up a good idea in terms of that value proposition. We took it one step further and we took a look at district administrators who were mobilists or have a smartphone or tablet, and their thoughts around bring your own technology or bring your own device programs. And we did see that they were more supportive, not only of bring your own device or bring your own technology, but actually even in the idea of providing students with devices. So the idea of having that personal value proposition is a good driver to greater adoption. It worked the same way with the teachers when we took a look at the use of digital content. So teachers that were digital content users in their own professional tasks, so they were using digital content to support their own work, were much more likely to want to use it with their students than teachers that were not familiar with using digital content. Now, another outcome that we took a look at was really driven for us by all the conversations around e-textbooks and digital textbooks. And in our focus groups, we were starting to hear some things from students that we thought were interesting. So we did a series of questions last year about preferences for reading. Is your preference an online digital text or a traditional printed text? And what we found is that in many cases, the students did have a strong preference for digital. A little bit more actually on the middle school student side than the high school side. But there also was a large contingent of students that just weren't sure. So we did a little bit more work on that, and that's actually one of the reports that we're going to be releasing here in the fall is on some of this data findings and some of the focus groups that we did. And we found out that from the students it was highly situational. So if the students are reading a short article, an unsophisticated article, the students were very strong with me that it had to be something that was fairly simplistic. They actually preferred to read that online. If it was a longer article or particularly a scientific article, their preference was to print that and to read that in a hard text concept. The students, though, did tell us that they had that same sort of situational or contextual component when they were studying for a test. And in fact, in our focus groups that we did with students this year on this particular topic, what it really came out, sort of the end of the story came out, is the students really like a mix of digital and print depending upon what their particular interests are or what they were doing. Okay, so I told you I'd leave you with a couple sticky wickets here before we get to the trends. And once again, I am not trying to cover all of the sticky wickets that are out there that are challenging schools and districts right now, but I just picked 3 of them that we're going to take a look at. The first one has to do with teacher adoption of technology within the classroom. Now, this is a really interesting question that we asked students. So this is actually a reflection on the teachers by the students. So we asked students about their math class. And we gave them several different scenarios of what math class looked like. Was it a very traditional class with heavy emphasis on teacher-directed instruction, very little technology use? Was it a traditional class where the teachers used the technology to support their own instruction, the work that they were doing? Or was it a traditional class where there was a mix of teacher-directed instruction, student-directed learning, a wide range of different tools that could be used to support that? What I took out of this was we also asked students about online classes, and so I took that out of the mix for you right now since those numbers were still relatively small. So what we found is that, in fact, only 9% of high school students told us that that third option, where there is a mix of teacher-directed instruction, student-directed learning, and technology to support all of that, only 9% of high school students said that that reflected what their math class looked like. And in fact, when we took an additional look at this, because as I told you, we're data geeks, so we like to slice and dice, looked at it from a standpoint of student interest in STEM careers, we actually saw a differentiation as well. That the students that were in the classes that were using technology had a little bit of a stronger inclination to STEM than the students that were in the very traditional class that didn't have technology. Now again, my caveat on this, and we've been polling on student interest in STEM for many years, is that every year about 22 to 23% of high school students tell us that they're interested in STEM, so you can sort of use that as sort of your guidepost. We asked teachers about the types of digital content they're using in their classroom to kind of understand this teacher adoption. And we see some movement, you can see from 2008 to 2011, not as much as I would have seen. The big growth was obviously in the use of podcasts and videos, but as you can see, not much growth in some of the other areas. We asked administrators about the barriers to that they face in terms of bringing digital content into classroom instruction. Infrastructure is a big issue, teachers needing training. This idea of difficulty in evaluating quality is one that's particularly interesting to us. We asked an additional question on the survey of both the district administrators and the teachers as to what factors were most important when evaluating the quality of digital content. Again, we see another sticky wicket here in terms of the disconnect between teachers and administrators. Very different perspectives here. For the administrators, the idea of student achievement results tied to the digital content was most important to them. For the teachers, it's still very important to the teachers that that digital content is created by a teacher, that's referred by a colleague, and as you can see, that it's also free. Now another sticky wicket that's out there, we're all very aware of this, is the online assessments that are coming in 2014-15. So we asked both principals and district office administrators about their challenges. Again, as we heard with digital content, the infrastructure is an important part of this, but also the idea of training teachers and students to be prepared for that is something that they are dealing with. And then finally, this idea of assessments. Actually, we had some interesting findings on assessments in the general sense, beyond even the 2014-15. We thought it was particularly noteworthy that a third of middle school and high school students told us that their test scores don't really reflect what they know. We thought that was particularly interesting. We also know with our work from students that the students are increasingly interested in the production of content, not just the consumption of content, and that they see themselves as content producers. They actually highly value that and consider that to be an important skill for them to have for the future workforce, is this idea of content production. It, of course, lends some really interesting questions to assessment when we start thinking about how do we assess the production process, not just the end result. And then finally, the idea of shared vision. For a long time, since we started Speak Up, we've been talking about how the Speak Up data can help schools and districts better understand what are the different views of their different stakeholders, so that as they're making plans for the future, they can make sure that everyone is on the same page. Do we have a shared vision? So what I did is I brought just a few little data bits from a question that we ask all the respondents, which is, what technology do you think would have the greatest impact on learning if you could incorporate that technology into your ultimate school or your 21st century school? So I'm not going to go through all of the data here. We can actually look at it just by looking at the pretty colors. We see a lot of commonality, obviously, around e-textbooks. It looks like everyone is sort of on the same page regarding e-textbooks. Games, not so much. And we even see a disconnect on school-wide Wi-Fi, that ubiquitous internet on the school campus. Teachers, administrators, and students are all right in a line with each other on the value of that. Parents are still a little reticent to buy into that concept. So of course we're looking for students that are enabled, engaged, and empowered in the learning process. So what I thought I'd do is, before we open it up to your comments, your thoughts, your questions, and I know that the chat has been so active, I've been trying to keep an eye on it, is I thought I'd share with you just a couple of the trends that we're watching. They may be, as I said, similar things to what you're watching. So we talked a little bit about the spectrum of digital nativeness and the differences between students. We're continuing to watch that. One of the other ones that we think is particularly interesting is this idea around the inadequacy of what we're now calling, or the inadequacy of the one-to-one paradigm. Now, for many folks, and we talk with a lot of schools and districts around the country, everyone is very anxious about what is the perfect device that they should be getting. Should they be doing a tablet? Should they be doing a netbook? Where do laptops fit into this? Is there a role for smartphones? And I think it's sort of a funny conversation, because I bet if we took a poll here on our audience here, or any audience that we have the opportunity to present to, we're all carrying multiple devices and using many different devices for different tasks. And one of the things that's sort of a key component about personalized learning is giving students the opportunity to choose the right tool for the right task. And so I think that in some extent it may be interesting to start thinking about not so much the one-to-one perfect device, but rather to start thinking about what is the right device for the right task, and how do we get to that. The other thing that we think is really interesting is this ongoing conversation around responsible use versus acceptable use. And as we know, acceptable use talks about the do's and don'ts. Responsible use actually talks more about creating digital citizens, and we think that's a more important conversation. We're actually going to be polling a little bit more on that in Speak Up 2012. Now, of course, within some of the other things that are happening in the classroom, lots of interest in gamification, whether that is looking at the use of games, point systems, badging, all of those things. We think that's really interesting. Of course, that plays into this idea of students as content producers, as we were just talking about. And then again, and I mentioned it early on, you know, quite often those of us that have been around this space for a while, we look at technology as an engagement tool, and we think about it in terms of that being the value proposition for the students. Actually, when we talk to the students, they kind of shine on a little bit about the engagement. Sure, they're more engaged if there's technology involved, but the students actually use business language to talk about the value of the technology. They talk about it in terms of making them more effective, more efficient, giving them the opportunity to collaborate, giving them access to information. They actually talk about it more in terms of productivity than engagement. And so what I will often tell, particularly teachers, if we're only thinking about the value of technology as an engagement tool, we're missing a whole other part of the story. The students are already on the page of that additional part of the story. So we should probably get on the page too. So, as I said at the top, a lot more information is available on tomorrow.org. Please go ahead and take a look at that. There's presentations, there's many, many reports. We also do evaluation services around emerging technologies in schools and districts, and so some of those reports are there as well. And of course, I have to invite all of you, if you have not already participated with us in Speak Up. Speak Up will open up, the surveys will open up on October 3rd. This is actually the 10th year that we are polling students. I can't believe that's the case. And so we are obviously looking for a really strong participation, because I think there's a really interesting 10-year retrospective on the Speak Up data that we would like to present to Congress next spring. As I said, the surveys open up on October 3rd. We'll have surveys again this year for K-12 students, teachers, parents, administrators, librarians, technology coordinators. So with that, I think we have a nice amount of time left, Steve, to have some conversations, some chatting. I'd love to hear from folks on their thoughts on some of the data or some of their perspectives on what we've presented.
Thank you, Julie. So I did capture a couple of questions that came through that I don't think got answered. One was from Iron, and they wondered if you've ever visualized the data, maybe interactive graphs or infographics or the like.
So that's a great question. I love infographics, and in fact, we have 2 infographics that are on our website right now. We did that for the national report. So we have an infographic on our website from the student and parent data. So please go take a look at that. I'd love to hear what people think of it. And then we also did one specifically on our administrator data because we thought that was so important to be able to capture that. So I think that is a very interesting way to share some of the data. So please go ahead, take a look at that on our website. Feel free to download those. We're going to be doing more of those with some of our reports as well.
And again, so if you have a question for Julie, please feel free to put it in the chat or to raise your hand. You raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon in the participant window. Another one that came up was why the district was more interested in tech than the school site administrators.
So I'll give you my 2 cents on that. We actually saw a major shift in our data findings from administrators regarding their interest in technology starting about 2 years ago, and I believe it's because of what's happening with the school budgets. There suddenly was in many districts, I think, a light bulb that went on where some district administrators sort of looked around and said, you know, we've got some of this technology here already. Maybe we should be using it more effectively. Maybe there are some ways to leverage this technology more effectively than we are. And so I do believe that at the district level, to some extent, it's being driven by that sort of consideration, that financial consideration. We also know, as I mentioned, it doesn't matter what technology we poll on, we definitely see a correlation between administrators' personal use and access of technology and their value proposition on using it with students to drive student achievement. So as you could see from some of the data that I shared, a large uptick in terms of administrators taking online courses, thus having gone through that experience, they have a better appreciation for online learning, thus they're more interested in it. Same thing with mobile, we saw that same correlation. So I think it's a combination of the increased exposure to the technology and a personal value proposition, as well as being driven by some of those financial considerations.
There was a great story in the chat that you probably weren't able to see, but it was about a district that had given out iPads to every educator and how dramatically that had changed the conversation on technology.
I bet. Yeah, I can only imagine.
So there were a couple of requests for you to post a link to your slides. And I couldn't remember if you had done that earlier, but if they are up somewhere.
I haven't done that yet. But we'll do that on tomorrow.org. We'll get that done as soon as we get off here.
Okay, that's very
we'll get those
generous of you. Carolyn says, I've heard a lot about changing the labels. Maybe your project should be Project Today. Education that meets the needs today's digital world and learner.
Well, you know, it's so funny. I bet there are some people here that don't realize this, but Project Tomorrow is actually a newer name. The organization used to be NetDay, so some of you may remember NetDay from the school wiring efforts. And NetDay merged with another nonprofit in 2005 that was called Project Tomorrow, and so we like that more forward-thinking look than the old NetDay name. But obviously, it's a continuing evolution that we're all going on. So I love that. Project Today, how interesting. I love that. Oh, I see some people do remember NetDay. That's nice.
So if I've missed one of your questions in the chat, please post it again. I apologize. Or you can raise your hand, just the hand icon in the participant window, and we'll give you the microphone.
And I just wanted to say, Steve, thank you so much for facilitating this. This is a wonderful opportunity. I always love these conferences, and you do a great job, Steve, so thank you.
Oh, you're kind. I feel like it is a part of this larger story of peer development and online learning, and I like to think that we're making a difference.
Oh, I definitely think so. You know, this is such a dynamic field right now, and obviously I've been in this for a long time, and we've been, as I said, polling on Speak Up now. This will be the 10th year, and it's been fascinating to see this evolution, whether it is in people's usage or the thing that I always spend a lot of time on is the value proposition, as well as people's aspirations. And so they go hand in hand. I just think it's really, we're in a very exciting and dynamic time right now in terms of education technology. I know that it's frustrating for some people, but I actually think that we're hitting some tipping points in many, many different areas. And that's all very positive. That just opens it up to all sorts of new opportunities.
Have you ever used your data as a way of introducing a change process for a school or a district or a conversation around education?
Oh, that's really interesting, Steve. Actually, we do. I actually do a number of different types of workshops with schools and districts. I did one just a couple of weeks ago with a school district that was interested in moving to the next level. They were fairly sophisticated in terms of their technology use, but they realized that their plans had gotten a little stale and they need to think differently. And so we used the data as the catalyst for a workshop for their administrators and for a cadre of teachers, and they also brought some students into the conversation to help them think differently. One of the things that's so interesting about the data is that we all carry paradigms with us, mythology, shall we say. We think this or we think that. And sometimes what the Speak Up data can do is that it can actually break down some of those myths or defy some of those myths. So I hear it all the time. People assume that their students want X, Y, and Z, or they assume that their parents won't support A, B, and C. And so the Speak Up data actually, when it is collected within the school or district, gives you more of that authentic feedback. Particularly the parent data, I think, is particularly has really strong value for districts in terms of using for their own planning. So yeah, we do have that opportunity. I'd be happy to talk to anyone if they are interested in more details on that, but we do work with schools and districts, either if they are just starting up a new initiative and want our help in terms of thinking through how to leverage the data that way, or as I said with that one example from just a couple of weeks ago where they felt that their plans had gotten a little stale and they wanted to be able to work through some new planning. So we're always happy to do that.
I think people would really value even sort of an overview of an outline of how you approach that conversation, because it seems like more and more those are conversations that are going to have to take place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. It's I think for too long our districts have not tapped into, and I usually make it as a positive, tapped into the wonderful assets that they have in terms of whether it's the student voice or the parent voice or even the teacher voice. You know, I don't know if everyone's familiar with it, but when we started Speak Up, it was 100% focused in on the student side. And literally the very first year that we were doing Speak Up, we got calls, phone calls, almost all day long asking for the teacher Speak Up version because the teachers felt that they needed to have a greater voice. I think one of the things that's so interesting from the work that we've done with these workshops is that quite often what you have to do sometimes is you have to break down those paradigms. You have to break down some of those assumptions and mythologies that people hold on to. And so we quite often can do that with the Speak Up data. I didn't do it here in this presentation, but if folks are interested, it's on our website. I have a profile of an education technology user, and we share the profile. This is what this particular student is interested in: online classes, online tests, using a mobile device. And I have all the percentages there. And then I ask either the participants in the audience or the participants in the workshop to guess as to who is that student. Inevitably, people will guess that it's a high school student based on the particular profile. It actually, from our data, and it's data from last fall, we update this every year, is a third grader. And so breaking down some of those preconceived notions as to what students are not only interested in but capable of doing with technology is usually a good way that we start some of those workshops. Because of course we're all very interested in focusing in on the learner and understanding the learner's needs, but you have to sometimes get over that hurdle of what baggage are we carrying in terms of our own assumptions on what that learner needs. And as I said, the Speak Up data gives you a nice way to sort of start that conversation. Lovely.
Okay, probably have time for one or two more questions. If you've got a question that hasn't been asked yet, please feel free to post it in the chat, or you can raise your hand. Julie, every time I hear you speak, it reminds me of how interesting your work is.
Oh, well, thanks, Steve. Actually, if you don't mind, I would love to ask the audience a couple questions, if
Absolutely.
that's okay. We are actually right now in Speak Up question development mode for Speak Up 2012. It's an exhaustive process, as you can imagine. And so I have been on almost nonstop phone calls with thought leaders, partners, education associations, district folks, teachers, parents, getting their ideas for new question ideas. So maybe in the chat box, if people could just make a note of the things that they think we should be asking. What are some hot topics that you're seeing that are out there that we should make sure that we're covering to make sure that we're being relevant with the types of questions? That would be incredibly valuable to us right now.
Yeah, so feel free just to post those comments in the chat. I was really interested in you call DIY learning drive it yourself. And I think do it yourself and drive it yourself are probably not significantly different. But the whole idea of student-driven learning, of personal learning goals, of a student personal learning network. These things seem really attractive to those of us who live in this thought space, but I've sort of felt like they weren't actually as tangible or even on the radar for most students. But maybe I'm wrong.
I think we're going to see a lot of change in that number. Remember, again, I mean, I almost hate to say this, but I sometimes feel at this point our data is kind of stale. So we're very much interested in seeing how those particular items change in this year's survey. On the Twitter thing is particularly interesting because, you know, we've been polling on that for the last couple of years, and we got very little student movement on that up until last year. And now my focus groups this year have all been about Twitter. It's really interesting. The kids themselves bring it up. So it's going to be interesting to see kind of where that move goes. The other thing that we're seeing, which we also think is really interesting, is kids going out and finding online classes on their own to take as supplements to traditional education. And so we also think that's kind of interesting as a movement. You may have heard me talk before, Steve, about the free agent learner, which is a concept that we've been talking about for the last couple of years, which is really that student that is not just DIY learner as a DIY learner, but really believes that it's their own responsibility to drive their educational destiny, and that school is just sort of a side, you know, going to school is a side aspect, but they're really responsible for driving their own educational destiny. And so we think that's also very interesting.
Yes, and that's really stuck with me. In fact, intriguingly, there's a parallel here with the teacher professional development. I did a session at ISTEAC on Hack Your Education, and about half the people who came were actually teachers wanting to figure out how to drive their own PD when I thought they were going to be talking about student learning.
And we asked that same question about the we call it the free agent learner question, of the teachers as well. And so we've also started talking about the free agent learning teacher. So it sounds like we need a follow-up conversation on that, Steve.
There's so much fun here, yes. Okay, I think we're probably at a place where we should close. Julie, you can save the chat. Many people responded to your question, and do so by going to File, Save, and save the chat. Now, that's also available to do in the recorded version, the full recorded version, which will be up in about an hour. A link will be on the Keynotes page. I'm going to clap for you again. I'm going over the smiley face, and then I'm go down to applause. I know that's hard to find. I apologize for that. But thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, well, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Always really pleasurable to hear from you. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We do have a session right now getting started. It is Photo Essays as a Medium and Voice for Reflection. Hopefully some of you will join there. Thanks again to Julie. Thanks, everybody. Hope you're having a great day.